Capitalism versus socialism. Man, that debate can get heated, right? It often seems to generate way more heat than actual light. But what if we could just set aside the politics for a second and look at them as, I don't know, two different machines? That's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to dive into a source that compares their fundamental designs, their core philosophies, and their real-world results. So the big question is, how do they really stack up against each other once you cut through all the noise and the headlines? To figure that out, we're digging into an analysis that uses two very specific countries as case studies to see how these systems actually perform under real-world pressure. Let's see what it has to say. So the source we're looking at basically sets up a title fight between two very different models. In one corner, you've got the US model, which it describes as a capitalist, liberal, constitutional republic. And in the other corner, you have the Venezuelan model, a socialist, centralized, and, this is key, an expropriative petrostate. To figure out which one comes out on top, the source runs them through three big tests: the stability test, the morality test, and the viability test. First up, stability. All right, first up, the stability test. Now, when this source talks about stability, they don't just mean, keeping things from blowing up. It's actually about building what they call an architecture of predictability, a system where the rules of the game are clear, consistent, and something you can actually count on for the long haul. And this is where we get into the real nuts and bolts. The source argues that the U.S. system is designed to spread power out. You've got separation of powers, an independent judiciary, federalism. All these things create a predictable playing field where people feel safe to invest for the future. Now contrast that with the Venezuelan model, which this analysis says does the exact opposite. It concentrates power. This in turn leads to unpredictable rules, courts that are political, and this constant threat that the government could just take your property. That injects a massive amount of risk and volatility into the whole system. So when it comes to stability, the verdict from this source isn't even close. It's advantage US by a mile. And why? Because that predictability we were just talking about, well, the text says that's like the oxygen for investment and innovation. Without it, the whole thing just suffocates. Okay, round two. We've looked at the mechanics, the nuts and bolts. Now we're digging deeper into what the source calls the soul of the system, the question of morality. And it asks a really fundamental question. Who or what is each system ultimately designed to serve? And to get at this, the source introduces a really interesting concept called the moral unit. It's pretty straightforward. It's just the foundational thing, the person, the group, whatever, that the whole system is built to serve and protect. Is it the individual citizen, or is it something bigger? And wow, this slide really shows you the difference. According to the source, in the U.S. moral architecture, the moral unit is the individual. Everything else, private property rights, the freedom to make your own deals, voluntary exchange, it all flows from that single idea. But in the Venezuelan model, according to this analysis, the moral unit is the state. And that core belief is then used to justify actions like seizing property or censoring speech, all in the name of the collective good. It's just a totally different way of seeing the relationship between a person and the government. So because the system is built around protecting the individual, the source gives the moral win to the US model. And that brings us to the final round, and honestly, this might be the most important one: viability. All right, the final showdown, the viability verdict. The question here is super practical. Which of these systems actually works in the real world? Which one can last? Which one scales? And this is where the source's argument really boils down to its view of human nature. It says, look, capitalism, combined with the rule of law, it works because it's built for imperfect people. It takes our natural self-interest and kind of channels it into creating new things and building wealth. Centralized socialism, on the other hand, is seen as fundamentally unworkable because it requires things that just don't exist. Perfect leaders who are never corrupt, perfect information so they never make mistakes, and perfect citizens who always comply. And since that's not reality, the source says the only possible outcomes are corruption, scarcity, and eventually collapse. And this right here, this slide just nails the core difference in worldview. One system, the source says, is designed for real humans. It assumes we're flawed, so it spreads power out to limit the damage any one person can do. The other is designed for imaginary humans. It assumes leaders will be good and selfless, so it concentrates power in their hands. And we see how that turns out. So we've gone through the theory: stability, morality, viability. But now the source says, let's stop talking theory and look at the scoreboard. What are the actual real-world results that these two systems have produced? Okay, first, the outcomes the source attributes to the US model. We're talking the world's largest economy, the most innovation in human history, the most powerful middle class ever created, a massively successful immigrant society, and the global gold standard for the rule of law. And then you get this, the outcomes listed for the Venezuelan model: mass immigration, hyperinflation, food shortages, political repression, total institutional collapse. The contrast between these two lists, it's just staggering. So, to wrap all of that up, the source puts it in a single clean sentence. The US system is seen as more stable because it disperses power, more moral because it protects individual liberty, and more viable because it aligns incentives with actual human nature. And finally, the source leaves us with its sharpest, most direct conclusion. Capitalism with rule of law lifts people, socialism with concentrated power crushes them. A really powerful final thought to chew on from this analysis. Thanks for digging into it with me.